Good evening, and welcome to True Talks with Project Managers. My name is Beth May, and I am pleased to be here to kick off tonight's show. This is the second of 8 True Talks shows planned for this year, and we have a great show planned for you tonight. Tonight's topic, Stakeholder Management. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, as both a professional project manager and a volunteer with the nonprofit Project Management for Change. No matter how much AI and other automation you may have, you cannot accomplish your project without people. People who pay for your project, people who work together to deliver your project, people who use the product or service that is delivered, and even people who are indirectly affected by your project. These are your project stakeholders. Herb Kelleher, founder of Southwest Airlines, believed that if he took good care of his employees, they would take good care of his customers. That philosophy contributed to Southwest's massive success. I believe we should apply the same philosophy to project management. If you take good care of your project stakeholders, they will take good care of your project. We will be talking about how to take good care of stakeholders with 2 very special guests tonight, Joe Pusz, also known as PMO Joe, and Sarina Arcari. Our host will introduce them to you soon. And before I introduce our host, I'd like to bring your attention to the man behind the curtains, our producer, Dan Stay. He is the true wizard, helping us make web show magic. In addition to making sure that you can see and hear us, he is also monitoring the YouTube chat for your comments and questions. They will be addressed throughout the show. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our True Talks host, the host with the most, the inscrutable, the incomparable, the Renaissance man of our time, the one and only Kendall Lott.
Hey there, good evening, everyone. Oddly enough, my dad has the same name, so one of 2 only, Kendall Lott. Hey, Beth, good evening. And how's it feel to be on the producer side of the table there? Welcome to that side.
It's fun. Thank you.
Yeah, it's getting a lot. I just realized Dan, stay. It's almost like a board member's command to a volunteer. Dan, stay, please. We need your help. And he's been helping us a lot, so I appreciate that. But you've got some big activities happening on your own side over there. One thing, a call out to all of our participants or listeners tonight. Beth has been watching the show since we first started. So look at that. You go from like listener, viewer, to she was a guest talking about PM Day of Service and volunteer service. Now she's on the other side of the table. I guess my job's next, right? You're going to replace the host position. That's it. Dan and I quake in our boots. So we can always allow that to happen. But yeah, hey, there's a point to that. To our listeners, get involved with your chapter, get involved with a nonprofit, make project management part of how you continue your learning and growth like you're doing tonight by watching. And nothing happens without volunteers and around the Project Management Institute world anyway. So I appreciate Beth and Dan and Harry and Marina and everyone who's ever pitched in to help make these shows and other symposium things happening. But back to you for a second, Beth. Big events. We heard about it back in October. Now we're nigh upon it. We're the day before, the night before, the eve of the morning of PMDAS. Tell us about PMDAS and where we go from here.
So in 3 days, on Saturday, we will be having our 8th annual Project Management Day of Service, the DC Regional Project Management Day of Service. And that's an important distinction because we're having PMDAS events all over the world. In fact, after tonight's show, I have a call with someone from New Zealand who wants to set up a PMDAS there. And on Saturday, we have a couple of people visiting the event from Buffalo who want to set up an event there. We already have events in St. Louis and a variety of other places. So it's really exciting to see pro bono project management being done to serve the communities and to save the world one project at a time. So registration is closed for PIMDOS. We've got our matching all done. We've got 77 project managers and 17 nonprofits, and it's a totally virtual event, and we're really excited about it.
Well, let's talk about Incomparable there, everyone. That's Beth May. She is the project director of PM Day of Service for your 5th time in a row now, I want to say, something like that.
You are correct,
many times in a row. Yeah.
Yes.
And she's also the chief operating officer of Project Management for Change, which is the nonprofit that houses that event and the continuous value delivery. We urge you to hit the website and go and find ways that you can volunteer throughout the year as we work in not just one day, but on regular work with projects as we move through. So with that, listeners, your input matters tonight. So of course, if you get to fire off some questions, there will be people who monitor the YouTube chat, and we'll whisper sweet nothings in my ear, and I'll see if there's a question here we can bring forward. We try and bring everyone's questions forward. And we do, as you heard here, have 2 guests tonight. So the topic, stakeholder management. So let's talk about it a little bit. I was intrigued by it because many of you may be aware there's a PMBOK 7 out there, and it's a very different animal than the whole range of PMBOKs before. That would be 6. And stakeholder management managed to survive the rewrite. Not only did it survive, but it still maintains its position, its premium position, its primary position is number 1 in the performance domains. And I looked and checked into that. I'm sure all of you could pass the quiz tonight on what is the key elements of that domain. But just in case you need a cheat sheet, productive working relationships. It's about the working relationships, agreement with objectives, so we're all aimed at the same thing. And then for funsies, they seem to say the project beneficiaries should actually like your project, and the ones that don't, the opposers, you manage to mitigate their impact. I thought this was interesting because it's not about changing people's minds. It's about managing stakeholders. And that's what we're going to hear more tonight. So with that big bundle, let's get to our first guest. You may have seen him before because he does podcasts, and we're going to bring him up because he lives and breathes this stuff professionally, and that is PMO Joe. We should have had him on the PMO thing. He actually works with, this is Joe Pusz of the PMO Squad, of PMO Squad. Is it the PMO Squad or PMO Squad?
The PMO Squad.
Oh, it's the one and only. Okay.
It's the one and only,
so Joe, how you
PMO
doing?
Squad.
Calling in from Arizona?
Yep, suburbs of Phoenix out here, Gilbert, Arizona. The largest town in America, the town of Gilbert, Arizona. So a distinction that we have out here as well.
The largest town, I'm thinking footprint.
No, population-wise. Now, again, everyone thinks Phoenix, right, is this huge city, but it's really made up of a lot of suburbs. And the suburb I'm in, Gilbert, 270,000 people or so, a town that nobody's ever heard of before. Everybody hears about Mesa and Tempe and Phoenix, but Gilbert's right there with all of them. Great place to live. Got
lots of project managers out there?
Too many. And sometimes not enough, right? With all the hiring going on out here, we need more. Come work for the PMO Squad.
There you go, guys. We know where to go now. And I'm brought to you by Southern Maryland Chapter, recruitment and hiring all across the nation. Hey, let's talk stakeholder management here now. It's a big part of both your consulting and also your outreach through your podcast that you work on. It sounds like, and I enjoyed our conversations with it. Joe and I have met before, oddly enough. Speaking of podcasts, he and I were on a podcast about podcasting around project management. So it's very recursive. It's very recursive. So Joe, talking stakeholder management, what's the big problem? Like, we all know we're supposed to be doing it. We get it. Relationships. PMBOK tells us so we know it's true. So what's the big problem that you're observing in your consulting operation and as you do training and education with people?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me the most is that we as project managers understand stakeholders and stakeholder management. And when we use project management terms, we get that. But our stakeholders aren't project managers. So they don't know what a stakeholder is. They don't understand stakeholder engagement. They don't understand stakeholder management and the techniques that we use. So the challenge is, how do we get our stakeholders to actually understand what we're doing without using project management terms, without understanding the different techniques we get to do, right? It's like if I walked into an engineering department and they started talking engineering to me today, I wouldn't understand, right? I don't get the engineering terms. So my big struggle is to help people know that they're actually a stakeholder, but don't call them that. Treat them like a person. Their title within the company, their responsibility or accountability using a RACI, right, on a project to know what they are. And then they get more engaged when they start thinking in their language, in their lingo, as opposed to our project language, because they don't understand our language. Let's talk to them in just regular business talk.
Have you seen that cause a problem? What do people report, or what do you see? Where do you see it as a problem? You observe it happen. What's the implication of that, or the impact of that, rather?
Well, at times the stakeholders run, right? They retreat because they don't know that that's what they are, right? You start talking about, hey, the stakeholders need to be involved in this project. Well, I don't know if I'm one of them. I'm just going to go in the background and hope that they don't see me. It's the old sit in the back row of the college class instead of the front row. But we need our stakeholders. We need them to be engaged, and we need to manage them in the terms that work for them, right? I always preach this, right? Let's bring it out of the project management world and bring it into just day-to-day running a business, working within the business, leading a team to execute a project. If you're a vendor, if you're a sponsor, if you're a team member, all of those people, we give them titles because we're special. We're leading the project. But they already have titles. They already have roles within the organization. And we need to understand that and let them work in their context, right? Communication's a two-way street. It's the person giving the communication and the person receiving. If we send messages that they don't understand, that's only.
We both froze, or I froze. You're unfrozen.
Yep, now we're back.
Yeah. We forgot about digital management, the whole problem of managing the bits and bytes in here. I actually have to confess, sadly, that very recently, and let's just say it was like after Christmas, like that recently, I just had a total confusion with a would-be client. So you think it's bad with the client trying to do sales and do this, where we worked through a lot of stuff. We talked a lot of stuff. And then I gave them a document that referred to stakeholders and giving them artifacts. And they said, I think we understand what you're talking about, but we have a question. What are stakeholders? You mean the director? And what's an artifact? And I was like, oh, I meant people and Word documents, pictures, right? So I hear what you're saying. If you don't even use the right vocabulary, I think something we heard in PMO discussion last month was about honoring the organization. In other words, you have an obligation to understand how the organization functions. So you said something interesting there to me about use their titles. You're not stakeholder salience model number 7 for me. You are director. You are a person who does, or whatever. What are the signals that it's gone wrong that you've observed or people report to? Like, how do you know? We can all hear this on the tape right now, right? Okay, good. I'll talk to them in their language. How do we know when we've lost them?
Well, silence is one, right? When they don't get back to you. We've all had that problem where we send a message out. Could be an email, could be a second email, could be a third email. We're now in this remote distributed world, so we can't really walk down to the office like we used to. So if we're not getting a response back for some communication that we need, could be a risk management, could be overcoming an issue, could be on anything within the project. That's a good indicator, right? When they're just ignoring us or being silent. Another indicator is if they're responding with something that we don't really understand the message, right? Like we ask a question and we get something back that we're like, wait a second, that wasn't what I was expecting, right? Kind of like the mention where you provided that doc to your client and they saw, we think we understand this, but it's stakeholder and artifact, what's that? You would expect, hey, if I gave them that, they would understand it. So if you get a kind of a quizzical response back or silence, 2 big glaring red warning lights flashing up in the air, right? Stakeholder management problem. How are we going to fix this?
We're supposed to be working towards common objectives, at least per the PMBOK, as I was just looking. It strikes me that one of the things that's hard for me to gauge, but I would imagine it's a stakeholder problem, is their level of actual engagement. for example, we develop an issues log. And sure, we're in the meeting going, yep, that's still an issue when you delay till next month or whatever, but not actually engaging in fixing the issue or having the conversation, or they're taking ownership of it if it's a client, or allowing direction to it if it's somebody within the same working team. That's one of the things that I had seen. Have you seen that around engagement, or how do people measure that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an obvious one, right? That we come across that all the time. And again, I think we want to be able to understand projects are just made up of people, right? And how do we interact with people? If we weren't project managers and we were at home working with our friends, our family, our neighbors, whatever it may be, there's a communication dynamic involved. And it's not the same for every person, right? How we talk to our children, how we talk to our spouse, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers is all different. So as we work through stakeholder engagement, get to know our stakeholders as people and understand the different types of communication we need to have with them. And I think that helps us be able to be more effective as project managers. Remember, stakeholder management is us. We're the PMs are the one doing the managing. So we have to adjust to our and not expect that they're going to adjust to who we are. And I think that's really important for everybody to understand as well, that this is a we activity, right? It's the project team. It's not the stakeholder who needs to make the adjustment. It's us managing them.
You know, you said something there with the we that I thought is interesting, because even in the traditional communications model that you mentioned earlier about, I send a message and they have to be able to hear it and receive it, that still has an almost opposition effect to it, as opposed to what PMBOK calls for. We are achieving these objectives. And I was just thinking, the way we talk about communications even sometime is, I'm hitting the ball and you're catching the ball, and you have to recognize it as a ball, this message that comes to you. But the we together changes that dynamic some, I think. And I don't often think of it that way. I'm trying to communicate to someone as opposed to engaging together with the same communication. You mentioned that the communication changes sometimes, is different with different ones. When you're helping instruct or execute, do you use some sort of salience model, some sort of grid where we talk about stakeholders in the context of power and urgency, direct need? Do you structure an approach to thinking through that, or do you recommend one?
Yeah, I think, we've got the old thing that we rely on, that each project is unique. Therefore, the techniques we use. The bigger the project, usually the more structure and rigor you need. The smaller the project, maybe less formal approaches. But I'm a big fan of a definite stakeholder engagement map, stakeholder engagement spreadsheet or template, communication plans to be able to set expectations for how you're going to engage with your stakeholders. And again, this helps set expectations at the beginning of the project to let a stakeholder know that they're a stakeholder. Because remember, they just think they're a director or an employee or a coworker or a peer. When we work with them and get to know them and sit down and talk through, here's what we're going to need from you, here's how we're going to engage with you, the frequency, the methods, the purpose, you're coming to a common ground. You're establishing that we're now a team, right? We're working together. So to me, stakeholder management definitely should rely on tools, but I think we adjust the tools to align with the type of project we're executing. Right? I'm a firm believer that it's not a one-size-fits-all world that we do with project management. We have to pull the right tool for the right time, right? Just like a carpenter working on your house doesn't show up with only a hammer, right? He or she uses the right tool for the job, and we as project managers have to be able to adjust to that as well.
Do you have situations where you find it important for the stakeholders to know who the other stakeholders are, or where they sit in the constellation, or has that become too confusing? In other words, you're in this group here, but we have other ones here, and their relationship to each other in your project. Is that relevant, important, confusing, clarifying? How would you approach that?
I think hugely important, right? I think everybody needs to know that it's a collective that's going to get this project over the finish line. And each person has a role within that project. Again, some of them may be active participants, some of them may be passive, Some of them just maybe providing oversight or guidance, but they have to know who can be touched at what point to be able to get the influence they need from them. And if those people are unknown, I think we as project managers haven't done a good enough job to share who the total team is, right? Who's everybody that's involved on this? I'm a huge believer of the big hug, right? If you bring everybody together and get them working towards a common cause, you can see above my head there, right? Purpose-driven PMO is one of the things that we do at the PMO squad. When we build a common purpose and establish an emotional attachment to the project we're doing, it's no longer just an IT project, right? It now becomes a project to increase the amount of employee engagement, which could lead to higher scores with output of performance, which then leads to happy customers, et cetera. When we think we're just doing an IT project, we don't make that connection. When we think we're doing an employee engagement project, we can connect to it. We can move further. But everybody to be engaged has to understand who's on the team, who's working together, who's the collective we that we're all working to build a common purpose towards. And I think that's really important. I really do think that oftentimes we try to minimize in the project world and focus on the small, and we miss the benefits of getting the macro from the project, whether it be the team macro or the purpose macro. When we miss that out, I think we really miss on an opportunity to get more engagement from all of our stakeholders, really.
You just made me think of something here when you said, like, it's not an IT project, right? We're engaging. It makes me think we could almost substitute the word project with the word engagement, as in it is a set of activities where we engage with other people. So instead of I've been assigned a IT project or a construction project, I have a construction engagement. It produces this kind of output, right? I think we're saying it's so focused on people that it really is about those interactions and how they relate.
Yeah, a good example, we had a client we went into and we were talking to the project team and we asked them, why are you working on this project? It was a new CRM implementation. And the project team, we're in a status meeting, so we're getting all sort of feedback, but the primary, if we affinitize the responses, right, the response back was, we're upgrading technology to the latest technology. We went and then asked the sales and marketing team why we were implementing the CRM solution for them, right, the end customer.
Right.
And they said because we had a strategic goal this year to increase our sales by 20% and to increase our marketing outreach by 150%. Two very different answers to the same project.
Yeah.
And if we're stakeholders and we're managing our stakeholders, how as project managers can we meet expectations when we don't even have the same common understanding as to why we're delivering that project?
Again, one of the adages out of our recent direction from PMI in the best practices is that it's about understanding the common objectives. And it sounds like we can get at that through this concept of the stakeholder lens. And that's where you start. Are we really working for the same objective? And I think getting those goals linked together is really important. How do you suggest, or how do you actually go about thinking about stakeholders who fall in that negative category, the ones that are not being helpful, in fact, maybe pulling against the outcomes of this engagement? How do you see that, and how have you thought about that, or what can you tell us about that? Are you able to categorize them in any way? Have you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of negative Nellies out there, right? That impact our project. The reality is, as project managers, our influence is really minimized to the outcomes within the project. But we're doing our project within the boundaries of an organization, and at times we have to rely on the org structures to help us to influence some of the people that we may not have a direct impact over, right? I think every project manager at some point has encountered a project where they're not intentionally sabotaging the project, but maybe they're not putting their best foot forward to try to help the project be successful. So, at times you may have to go reach out to their superior, their manager, to get them to get on board with everything. Maybe you reach out to the sponsor of the project. and have them work that through their channels. But there's definitely different labels that could be put on people. I'm not a big label person. I believe that actions speak louder than words, and people kind of get their own labels. But certainly, we have to be able to deal with the positive and the negative. Usually, the negative can have a ripple effect, a more lasting effect. So we want to try to address those as soon as we can, but do it in a way that we're not trying to impact the team. We don't want that person to then call out the fact that they were addressed in a certain way, right? The impact could be impacted, or the project could be impacted. So absolutely, got to deal with the good and the bad, and every project has them.
One of the things I've run across in a consulted with a team working for a client, so this is not internal work, this is in support of an external client, that I've run across, and it confounds me sometimes. So there's stakeholder management about my project as they interact with my team. For example, my team member may run into trouble, or I may run into trouble because I called something out as an artifact and nobody knows what I'm talking about. He doesn't have an archaeology degree. The words have meanings to other industries, right? So
absolutely,
you run across that. You're a team member. You're a team leader. You're supporting your team. One of the things that I've run across that was difficult is when my stakeholders are in conflict. Like, it's not about how they're working with me, but we trip over. I view it almost, I called the word constellation earlier. It's like this black hole of energy that's pulling. It's like we don't understand the responses we're getting. And it's because it has nothing to do with us or our project. It has to do with how they're reacting, how they're interacting and relating in their organization, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen that yourself? And then, how would you suggest tackling that, or what's a better way to see that? I just tell my people keep their head down, right? When elephants dance, mice tremble is where I'm at. So,
yeah, I mean, organizational agility and business acumen, right up there as two critical requirements of a project manager. Listen, organizational politics are real; they exist, and regardless of your project, they're there, right? So you're going to have to find your way through it. This goes right into stakeholder engagement, right? Your sponsor, do they know they're the sponsor of the project? Do they understand the importance of that role, right? PMI, Pulse of the Profession trend reports have shown the great impact of an engaged sponsor on a project. Utilizing the right people to help overcome those political challenges is important, right? The last thing you want to do is get in the middle of an organizational politics in a fight and get your project to be jeopardized because of that. But there's a portfolio of projects going on at the organization, right? It's not just your project. Somebody else has a project that they surely bet are more important than your project. And they think you're pulling resources away from your project. You don't want to get in the middle of that fight, right? So the organization needs to be able to make those decisions. You have to be able to leverage your sponsors and the appropriate stakeholders to help you in those cases. But don't be naive to think they don't exist, right? I mean, that's the reality of the world. We all have priorities. Some of them are organizational priorities. Some of them are personal priorities. And we have to be able to recognize both of them and be able to react to both of them to make sure that we're doing the best for our project.
How much do you see the charisma or power, assertiveness, conviviality of the project managers playing in here? And I got to this from thinking a word you said earlier about influence. We're really looking to see how people have influence, because it's about influence. In my mind, stakeholder management is getting others to take action in all cases, which is hard because for all of us, right, is how do I convey this necessity? And in a case of what we're talking about, this necessity that you signed up for, if someone just told you you're a stakeholder anyway. How do you see the role of the actual project manager's own influence, or looking at it through the lens of influence? We all have to be extroverts, or what's going on here?
It's a great question, right? On my show, Project Management Office Hours, right? You mentioned I'm a podcast host. So on that show,
is that a weekly or monthly?
Twice per month.
First twice per month. Thursday. Here we go, guys. I'm sorry, I stepped over you. Say that again.
So the way I look at that is there's good project managers there's inexperienced project managers who are going to become good, and then there's great project managers. I think back to my own career. When I started out, I didn't even know I was a project manager. Then I found out I was a project manager and got some training. And then I got a little bit better, and experience taught me how to, hopefully, knock on wood, my clients think we're great project managers now. But the difference is people skills, right? Whether you call them the power skills or we're change agents or whatever it may be, the ability to motivate and to influence, that's more important in my mind than the ability to build out a great WBS and a project schedule, right? Whether you're agile, whether you're traditional, whether you're hybrid, whatever your methodology is going to be, schedule adherence is important, but it's not as important as being able to work with people. And to me, that's the number one thing as project managers we have to do, is we're leading a team. So no different than if you're a coach of a baseball team or a gymnastics meet within your kids' organizations, right? We're drawn to people who have that something that are able to influence and get others to get stuff done. And as project managers, as we're working with stakeholders, it's so important for us to be able to do this. So, there's different people in the industry like Ruth Pierce and her character strengths, and Carol Osterwheel and what she does, and a whole host of others, right? Their focus isn't as much on the technical components of project management that you might find in the PMBOK, but they're more focused on people leadership and being able to execute and lead teams of people to accomplish goals. So without a doubt, to me, for every project manager that's out there listening, a key to your growth as a PM in improving stakeholder engagement will be your ability to enhance your people skills and to be able to influence, motivate, and build teams to accomplish outcomes. Those are the things that really separate the good from the great.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you say that. The stakeholder management is that key that takes us from good to great. That of all the parts, I think that really is the one, because that's really what we're all based on here. I was listening to an organizational podcast the other day that said one of the interesting questions for all of the work we do together is, where does the project go at night when everyone goes home? Right? What happens? So I talk from organizations, but the reality is it's about people. When people stop playing the game because they go home to their families and do other things and go to sleep at night, where does the project go? It goes nowhere until we recreate it by engaging, is one theory or one thought about this. But yeah, Osterwheel, Pierce, Brownlee, these are great names. I suggest our listeners go and follow up on them. I think Pierce had the one about managing in a fog, walking in the fog. Leadership is walking in the fog. Is that what it was?
That was Carol Osterwheel had that one.
Oh, Osterwheel. Okay, yeah. Very interesting.
In a great book, you mentioned Brownlee. Dana Brownlee's got a great book, Managing Up. I would recommend everybody go read that book. And that characterizes people, right? Puts them into some brackets for different names you can give the people. But the key of that is it's stakeholder engagement. You have to understand there's people in the organization with a higher rank than you, and you need to be able to manage them to be able to get the outcomes that you're looking for the project. So yeah, there's a lot of influence within our industry that takes the technical skills, which are still important, right? You still have to have a schedule, still need to manage a budget. Those things are critical. But getting people to accomplish the task when they have 4 or 5 other tasks, that's important. The ability to motivate and influence and build relationships and know those people and treat them all uniquely, because you can't treat every team member the same. So having that ability to go and understand that, man, Kendall, you hit it on the head, right? That's so important that we be able to do that.
Well, speaking of getting others to take action, I'm going to invite Dan to bring on our next guest here, and we'll switch over to Sarina Arcari, who's going to be playing tonight's role of practitioner. And PMI folks, you're going to love this. She's actually on the board of directors. You managed to elect this person, so pay attention, because she's paying attention to you. And she's calling in from Hawaii, I believe.
That's right.
Probably
I'm in Hawaii today, but normally a resident of Calvert County. So my heart is also in Southern Maryland.
Southern Maryland chapter, just waiting. So it's a local gal that made big, right? So someday you'll be home and say, this is what happens at PMI Global. So Sarina, let's talk a little bit here. So coming at us as an award-winning transformation executive, I hear, but I see you as a board member, and that to me is kind of the peak of having to work a lot of relationships to get there. You heard a lot of stuff here around stakeholder management that we were trying to handle here. What is your experience in the complications of stakeholder management? We've been talking about kind of how you approach it as a PM, but when you think about actually, every plan is great until, you meet the client. No plan survives the first contact with a team or a client. Where have you seen it go awry yourself?
Well, as a practitioner,
Hold it. I have an ambulance somewhere. Is that on your side?
it's probably on my side. I apologize.
Okay, good. You're on a good side of town.
Hopefully not coming to my house, but
yeah, really.
yeah, no, as a practitioner, I would say, I can double click on everything that Joe said earlier. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that he said. And I would up the ante just a little bit because I think, especially in the National Capital Region, we're seeing an influx of stimulus dollars going into massive infrastructure projects. And these get to be highly complicated. And I imagine our chapter members here in Southern Maryland are being tasked with some of these projects as they're coming online. And many of those have the public as a primary stakeholder. And when you add the public as a stakeholder, I think your complexity increases exponentially. And so I would say it can even become as much as a matter of life and death. And I know that sounds a little bit inflammatory, but one of my favorite client examples of stakeholder management and the need for it revolved around a small nonprofit that is responsible for increasing rural recovery housing. And they were really not project managers by trade. They were social workers by training, trying to do good in the community and failed to fully analyze their stakeholders. And at a public hearing, were faced with a literal posse of armed ranchers who were in opposition to their project and ultimately were successful in killing the project, which then, disadvantages the community, the potential residents of that facility that was going to be built, and puts a project manager out of work, right? A project manager needing to go find another project. And so I think it's really critically important to understand, a lot of people eschew the whole planning phase of projects because they just want to get to work. But I think when you're in that planning phase and assessing and identifying your stakeholders, that you couldn't spend your time more wisely, honestly. And as Joe mentioned earlier, know who they are, know what's important to them, know how to communicate to them. So this then bleeds over into our technical, communications plan. And if they're in opposition or they're champions, they could make it to your risk register as either positive risks to be exploited or potential hazards to the project that need to be actively managed and mitigated. And so I do think it is the combination of our art and science as project practitioners. And I think that more and more we're going to see people being asked to do projects who would never identify themselves as a project manager or a project management professional, let alone a credentialed practitioner. And so these skills are ever more critical as we see all of this, federal funding coming into large infrastructure projects and stimulus packages.
You mentioned we have to assess them, and I thought that was interesting when you said assess, and I think you started to answer it when you said what's important to them. Tell me more about how you think of the word assess here. I'm wondering how much we're sitting up on a catbird seat watching over everything. Sometimes as a project manager, I feel like I'm in the midst of all of it. And then sometimes it's kind of like, and it's not about being high and mighty, but I'm outside of the system. And that assess has a certain clinical nature to it. What do you mean by that, and how do you go about that yourself?
So what I would do at the beginning of any project or program is sit myself and then with my project team and try to brainstorm who are all the possible people inside the organization, outside of the organization, in the community. Who are all the possible individuals, organizations, communities that could be impacted by the work that this project is chartered to do? And then you start to group there's your stakeholder list, and you start to group those stakeholders, by your assumption in terms of champions, supporters, watchers, and opposition. And then I do think there is a sort of it's that planning thing, right? That people don't like to slog through, but sometimes it is a person by person investigation to understand where an individual or a group of people stand with regard to your project. And that's what I mean by assessment, really understanding where they're coming from, putting yourself in their shoes, understanding all the competing priorities that they're trying to juggle in their lives, both personal and professional, organizationally, the politics. Again, when you get into publicly funded projects, understanding where that funding is flowing from, who cares about it, who's going to get in trouble if you misuse those funds, what they're going to be looking for in terms of accountability. It can get very deep and complicated very quickly, but that's really what I mean when I say assess. And, Joe referred to a stakeholder register. When you get into a large, complex project, you really want to be following the science part, the technical part of our profession, and really creating a log of all of these stakeholders. Because as you meet with them, you're going to want to understand, what are their competing priorities? What are going to be the constraints on their time availability to work on the project? Do they even realize that they've been assigned or are involved in any way in this project? What's the best way to communicate with them? Some people can come out, and I would be one of these. Please don't call me on the phone because I'm almost back to back in some kind of meeting that prevents me from being on the telephone. But if you text me or email me, I'm much more likely to be able to respond quickly. And so if you want or need my attention, those are my preferred ways of communicating. I'd rather get a synopsis than sit in a meeting, for example. And I think a lot of your higher level stakeholders might feel the same. And you need to be able to understand. I love this idea of managing up because a lot of your most influential stakeholders will outrank you, either within your organization or outside. And so understanding how they need to be communicated to and how you can leverage their influence to the advantage of the project is critically important.
And we hit the influence again of leveraging using their influence to help it's not just how we influence them or work with them, but getting them to take action, them to have influence. That second plug there for managing up, I'll have to tell everyone, PM Point of View, episode 61, Dana Brownlee, when she wrote that book, she came onto my podcast and talked about it. So you can hear more from Dana on that one. But here's what I just heard tonight that's interesting. 100% of all my guests tonight, 2 of 2, have seemed to indicate that there's an actual possibility that stakeholders don't know they're the stakeholder. Tell me, have you experienced that? I mean, is this a theoretical concern, or how have you run into that directly? That's kind of mind-blowing, right, in a way.
Well, I think sometimes, especially when the public is a stakeholder, you can have many members of the public that don't realize they're a stakeholder until it shows up in their backyard, right? So you get this whole NIMBY backlash.
That stakeholder as customer as opposed to a project. That stakeholder looking at the output as opposed to helping you get through the project, perhaps.
Perhaps, or if the train tracks are going to run through their community, right? They might not be a customer, but they might be impacted in a way that they feel is negative. But even within an organization, it's possible to have a very busy executive not understand that a project just got approved that really lands squarely in their lap or tangentially in their lap, co-sponsoring, if you will, with another executive who may have started the ball rolling. But, if you're in a functional area that requires a technical solution, your CIO hopefully understands that they just, received a new project into their portfolio, but they may not always. And so, making sure that all of the leaders that are impacted and from whom you need support are aware that the project's been chartered, aware that you're on the job as the project manager, aware of their role. And then, going back to the concept of assessment, I think one of the other things you want to probe for when you're talking with your stakeholders initially is, if they are champions or supporters, what would they be willing to contribute? Are they willing to talk to their peers? Would they be willing to attend a public hearing and, talk about all the great things that this project is going to deliver? And so you can leverage your stakeholders to advance the cause of the project, just as much as you need to manage the ones who might be detractors or opposers. And so it's not all negative. There can be great positive, in stakeholder management as well.
Well, before I bring Joe back in, we all have to know, because again, we don't get to see into the behind the curtain at PMI. In your experience, brief that it's been, I believe you were elected in August, right? And you took on.
Elected in August, my term started in January.
Given that job, that work you have, how would you describe your stakeholder engagement at that point? What kinds of stakeholders are we seeing, and what makes that unique, if in at all, compared to the project work you've done as a senior PM and senior influencer?
I would say there's a lot of similarities. I mean, PMI has a vast array of stakeholders. As an institute, we have members, we have credential holders, we have a cadre of volunteers. We're a global organization. We have organizations who employ our credential holders and who look to the Institute for guidance in project management. We have employed staff. All of these people are stakeholders of the Institute. And, the Institute's aim is to be the go-to place for project management. And so, we have vendors who work with us, training partners who are authorized by the Institute to deliver training for some of the credential exams. And so I would say it's not dissimilar to some of the work that I've done in the public sector, where, the stakeholder array is vast. And I couldn't agree with Joe more in terms of every stakeholder needs to be met where they are and understood for who they are and what their needs are. And so what we need to do to address the needs of our volunteers globally is very different than we may need to address our staff or our members, our credential holders, et cetera. And so it's complex and it's exciting. And, it is an elected volunteer role. And so, I have a great obligation, I think, to the folks who voted and put us in these roles. We have to always make sure that we are a membership organization and we need to be serving our members. But part of serving those members is making sure all those other stakeholders are being kept as satisfied as possible, because those organizations are going to employ our members and those training partners are going to train our members. And so it's a really interesting job, and I'm loving it so far. And I'm very grateful to everybody who voted me into this role.
Well, given what you just said there and your cautionary tale at the beginning with a nonprofit that had some tremendous negative potential consequences, for all of you project managers who are volunteering for Beth's opening comment, that PM Day of Service, as I will be doing, you got me thinking, I need to think not just scoping a project, but including a discussion with someone who might not be a project manager, thinking about stakeholders. And I got to bring Joe back on, because I think the second I get a nonprofit manager on a phone call or a Zoom meeting, our platform on Saturday, bring on Joe here when you get a chance. As soon as I think of that, I'm like, hey, you need to think about stakeholder management. We need a stakeholder register. I think their heads will explode. So what is the way to talk to people about stakeholder when they don't speak PM, when we're not supposed to say those words? Because some of us are going live with this on Saturday, if not every day. But on Saturday, we're going to go and do volunteer, work for nonprofits to help them. Speaking to your problem that you noted first, Joe, we don't speak the language right. We shouldn't be using PM speak. How should I talk to a manager beginning to learn how to lay out a project about stakeholder management?
Yeah,
Start with Joe.
Are you impacted by what's going to happen on this project? Right. I'll give you a good example. Sarina had talked about life and death example on projects. Yeah. We used to run a PMO for Wellstar Health System in Atlanta, and we were working at the hospital to improve the Wi-Fi coverage, because the carts, they call them cows, right? Carts on wheels, would operate off a Wi-Fi signal. Well, the vendor didn't know that they were a stakeholder on the project. They went into a operating room, inserted a new Wi-Fi device up in the ceiling, and left. But they left the operating room without cleaning. There was an open heart surgery an hour later scheduled that had to be canceled because there wasn't a clean operating room to go into. The vendor thought I'm just installing a Wi-Fi device. They didn't understand that they were impacting life and death scenarios on the project because the project manager didn't take the effort to explain that to them. So this, if you're impacting or you are impacting the outcome of the project, it's easy to understand that, right? We can talk in non-project language to help people understand how they influence or impact the outcome and work within that project. That happens all the time. Maybe not as severe as that, but that stuff happens on projects all the time.
So talking to a manager in a nonprofit environment and say, who all impacts your project or impacts or cares about the outcome? And that's a way to start talking about it as stakeholders, is what I hear from there. Sarina, your thoughts?
I think it's helpful. Most organizations can understand how the money flows in their organization. Where do you get your funding from, right? Even in a nonprofit, we get grants, right? Okay, well, who are your grantors? And what accountability do you have to them? Do you consider them as stakeholder in the projects that you do? Are they going to care? Are they going to come back and ask you for reporting? And so people don't really think of people outside the organization as being stakeholders, but they can follow the money flow. Okay, well, when you get the money, who controls it? Oh, the CFO. Okay, well, that's a stakeholder, right? Because you need them to give you some. And then, and then who's going to get the work done? And then who's going to benefit from the work that gets done? So most people can follow that financial path. And I tend to use that no matter what kind of organization I'm talking about. Where does the income come in and from whom? Because they care, right? And then what do you do with it when it gets here? Who controls it? What accountability do you have for it? And then who benefits from what you're doing with it on the backside? And most people can kind of follow that along no matter what language you want to attach from a project management perspective. Most people can follow that path of the cash.
The capital area lens of follow the money just happened, didn't it? I'm just realizing when I was in political science studies, I remember them saying the whole deal is who are the players, what do they want, and how can they hurt me? Right? That's kind of what you're thinking through. And that was in a different context, but it seems to apply here. Someone told me the other day that I needed to focus on honoring the need and challenging assumptions when beginning to engage with other project members. And I think it applies here. Honor what people actually are after. And that's what you guys have been saying, right? Find out what they want, I think is underlying all that. So we've heard a couple different things in here about learning to speak in their language is one, getting others to take action, this idea of causing influence and understanding the organization. What do you see as the biggest flaw people do when undertaking that? Let's say that people have trying to change their language, are trying to honor or understand the politics of the organization, and are working to get others to take action. So we know those are the right answers. Which one of those have tripwires for us? What do we need to watch out for? Now that we've learned the right tactic, we're going to go for it. Where do we screw this up now? So that we won't.
Sarina, you want to go first?
I would say I frequently see project managers fail to engage the champion, which may or may not be the executive sponsor. Find the champion who has the most influence and leverage that because you're going to run into those people who look at you and think, oh, you're only level X in the organization. I don't need to listen to that. But find that highest level champion who can influence on your behalf and be okay with the work getting done, even if you're not doing it.
So let me push in a little bit there. You just said highest level, so I'm hearing power and authority. So you said the one with the most influence.
In certain organizations, absolutely, yeah.
The most influence at the highest level of power and authority. And then you said leverage. What does that mean? Is that what do we do to leverage them?
I think be okay with tasking them, asking them, encouraging them to act on your behalf or the behalf of the project itself. I think a lot of project managers think I have to do all the work myself, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm the project manager. And in some cases, especially when you're going for the influence, you may not have enough personal influence as the project manager, but you probably have a champion somewhere in the organization or outside the organization. I used to work for Amtrak. It wasn't beyond me to call the grant administrator at the Federal Railroad Administration if I really needed some help convincing people to, you know, get behind a particular endeavor. And I didn't have that level of influence, but she did. So
So I'm hearing influence mapping actually underneath that. I saw some of that online recently. Charles Lambden was writing about this. Influence mapping is a subset of stakeholder management, understanding where they go. Ask for help, I just heard, and then the great song "Let It Go." You don't own all of it, right? So there we go. Joe, you're gonna have to top Pixar and Disney now, I guess, or whatever, right? So what do you see as the tripwires in trying to speak? Where do the flaws happen as we attempt to speak the language, get others to take action, understand and honor the organization?
Yeah, Sarina took a lot of the good ones. She didn't leave much for me, but
Oh
I'll
no.
add in there to document, right? To go back to that
Okay.
stakeholder register and be able to say, these aren't assumptions as to who the champion is, right? Or who the most influential people are. Let's document and understand who all of these folks are on the project. And let's make sure they have access to that document so they know who else are the other stakeholders. And I think by able to get that out on paper and document it so that everybody can see it, I think that eliminates a lot of confusion that can occur through assumptions, right? The old saying, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Well,
Yeah.
if it's not documented, maybe people don't know they're the stakeholders. So let's get it on paper. Let's make sure everyone's aware of it. Make sure the right people sign off on it to validate that, yes, I agree. I am in that role and I hold that authority so that we can go leverage them. I think that's important, especially for new project managers who, they may not have the personal juice yet to go up there and ask the administrator of a federal agency to go do something. But if they already talked to them in a more casual setting and got them to agree that it's okay to call me, then that lightens the load a little bit when you have to go make that call. So
So
that's what I
big point there. No, that was I'm glad you got to that one. That's a really good one. We need to have the relationship before we need the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and
You
that might
never
be a
know
good
when you're
reason
going to need it.
yeah. Well, you have. I mean, it's otherwise it looks too opportunistic. I guess I don't know. It sounds hard. We've got about 2 minutes left, and I did want to ask one question, which is kind of off the wall. We're project managers. We get to project closing. Back in the old days of PMBOK, when I had to actually learn and read it, I remember thinking the last part was pretty simple. You release the team, and then because of all the knowledge areas, you're down to release the team, close out your communications, and close your contracts that you had. Right, all the rest of the knowledge areas fell away, including stakeholder management. So here's my question. Do you see, or how would you address the role of stakeholder management at post-closing? As this project ends, how do you see it? Is it relevant? In what ways do you see it relevant? 30 seconds. Go. Sarina, you're smiling the most. You get to go first.
I would say do not neglect to thank all of your stakeholders and give them credit for the success of the project, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to see them again on a future project. And so give them credit for the assistance that they lent, even if they were in opposition. Be gracious, thank them for their time and their inclusion and their engagement, and tell them you look forward to working with them again in the future. I think that is a really important part of closing out a project, any project.
I like, even if you don't look forward to it, right? Joe gave us an answer here. They're all good stakeholders, or gonna be good stakeholders, or excellent stakeholders, perhaps, right? I like your model there, Joe. Joe, thoughts post closing?
Yep. The reality, we do projects to produce value, right? There's some outcome that we're supposed to achieve. There's no better champion for your personal career than a happy, satisfied stakeholder. So if you stay engaged and you can validate benefits realization down the road, the next promotion you're looking for, the next client you're looking for, the next referral you're looking for, the next favor you're calling in, you're going to get it because you stayed engaged. Projects may have a beginning and end, but relationships don't. Leverage those as long as you can, not just for yourself, right, but for the good of the organization as well.
The project goes away, the relationships don't. Thank you for that input. Joe Pusz and Sarina Arcari, thank you tonight for sharing with us from your different perspectives, all of you way out west, but I know you've got the capital region at your heart. And with that, I'll bring up Beth. I think she has to close us out and tell us how we get PDUs or something. I don't know, Beth. Take us away.
All right. Yes, there is a slide that says how you get your one PDU, and hopefully Dan will put it up on the screen. There it is. Take the survey. We need your feedback so that we can continue to deliver great quality programs and then access online and view the show again. So that survey is the key to getting your PDU.
Oh, right. Well, let's do that. And everyone, let us know what we need to be doing here, because we want to give you topics that you're interested in, guests you're interested in, and the style that you want to hear it in. So let us know what you're up to. And with that, I think it's time to hear that heroic music that I know you're all jelly you don't have over at PEMDAS. So we do have our heroic music to take us out. Dan? And good night, everyone. We'll see you in April.